After 13 years, I returned home to heal the wounds of my family, read its stories. The old family house hadn't changed much. The cracked driveway still curved beneath the massive oak tree that had once held a tire swing. The porch steps creaked the same familiar tune under weary feet. And though years had peeled paint from the shutters and time had rusted the mailbox, the bones of home still stood strong. Claire stood in the middle of the gravel path, suitcase in hand, staring at the house like it might collapse under the weight of her return. 13 years. 13 years since she had left in a storm of angry words and slammed doors, vowing never to come back. And yet, here she was, 31 years old, newly divorced, and completely out of options. She took a deep breath, smoothed her coat, and walked toward the porch. Before she could knock, the door opened. "Claire!" The voice was quieter than she remembered, but unmistakable. Her younger brother, Jonah, stood there in jeans and a faded sweatshirt, his arms crossed like a protective barrier. He looked older. His hair was thinner, eyes a little more tired. But he was still Jonah. "Hey," she said. Jonah didn't smile, didn't step back to let her in. He just looked at her. Claire shifted her weight uncomfortably. "I didn't think you'd come," he finally said. "Wasn't sure I would." A silence stretched between them, thick and awkward. The weight of unspoken things hung heavy in the air. Childhood arguments, missed birthdays, a mother's funeral she hadn't attended. "You're here now," he said at last, stepping aside. Claire entered slowly, the scent of lemon polish and old books washing over her. The hallway was dim, lined with faded photos in dusty frames. One caught her eye. Herself at 16, arms slung around Jonah's shoulder. Both of them were laughing. It was jarring to see that version of herself carefree, rooted in family, untouched by the decisions that would come. "How's Dad?" she asked, her voice low. "He's not great." Jonah closed the door gently behind them. "He's not really himself anymore." Claire swallowed hard. Their father, the ever-gruff but devoted man who once taught her how to ride a bike and chase away nightmares, was now frail and fading. "You should go see him," Jonah said, his voice taut. Before he forgets who you are completely." Claire flinched. The words weren't cruel, but they stung all the same. The upstairs hallway was darker than she remembered. Dust coated the banister, and the wallpaper peeled at the corners. She found the door to her childhood room, hesitated, then opened it. It was like walking into a time capsule. The posters on the walls were faded, the bookshelf still full of old paperbacks and her high school yearbooks. Even the bedspread, blue with tiny white flowers, remained untouched. Claire sat on the edge of the bed and closed her eyes. For a moment, she wasn't a woman recovering from heartbreak and failure. She was just a girl again, dreaming of escaping to someplace brighter. Downstairs, a cough echoed, raspy, labored. She stood quickly and followed the sound to her father's room. The door was ajar. He was sitting in a recliner by the window, wrapped in a thick knit blanket. His once dark hair was now snow white, and his frame looked swallowed by the chair. A small oxygen tank stood beside him, hissing softly. "Dad." He turned his head slowly. His eyes met hers and widened. "Claire." Tears sprang to her eyes. "Yeah?" she said. "It's me." A ghost of a smile tugged at his lips. "You came home." She moved to him, knelt by the chair. He reached out a trembling hand, and she took it gently. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded as if he'd been waiting years just to hear that. Later that evening, Claire sat on the back porch with Jonah, watching the sun dip below the tree line. The silence between them was different now, softer, less sharp. "I didn't come just because of Dad," she said quietly. "I left because I didn't feel like I belonged anymore. I was wrong. But I was scared." Jonah stared straight ahead. "You should have said something." "I know." He ran a hand through his hair. "We all made mistakes." "Me too. I could have reached out." But Claire nodded. The past was thick with regret, but maybe it didn't have to define the future. "So," Jonah said after a long pause, "how long are you staying?" Claire looked at the sky, then at the house behind them. I'm not sure yet, but maybe long enough to fix things. Jonah finally looked at her and offered a small, crooked smile. Good. That night, Claire lay in her old bed, staring at the ceiling. The house groaned and settled around her, the same as it had when she was a child. Outside, crickets sang their usual song. She knew healing wouldn't be easy. Old wounds didn't close overnight, but being home, being with family again, was a start. And sometimes, the first step toward mending a broken bond was just coming back, even if it took 13 years. Morning sunlight filtered through the gauzy curtains of Claire's childhood bedroom, warming the faded blue bedspread beneath her. For a few moments, she lay still, the distant chirp of birds and the rustle of leaves creating a fragile calm. Then the memories returned, of her father's trembling hands, Jonah's guarded smile, and the emptiness that still echoed in the corners of this once lovely house. She rose, dressed, and padded barefoot into the hallway. Downstairs, she could hear Jonah moving around the kitchen. The clink of plates, the creak of the cabinet door that never quite closed. Some routines, it seemed, never died. Coffee? He asked when she entered, already holding out a steaming mug. Claire nodded and took it with a quiet, "Thanks." She leaned against the counter, sipping slowly. The bitter warmth grounded her, steadied her nerves. "Dad's still sleeping," Jonah said. "He usually doesn't wake up until around 10. Claire glanced at the wall clock, 8:42. It was strange how slow time moved here compared to the hectic rhythm of her life in the city. She didn't miss the noise or the subway or the endless to-do lists. What she missed, she realized, was feeling like she belonged somewhere. "I was thinking of visiting Mom today," she said softly. Jonah didn't look up from the pan he was rinsing. "The cemetery." Claire nodded. "She's on the hill now." Section D, near the weeping birch. Dad picked the spot. There was a pause between them, heavy but not unfriendly. "Would you come with me?" Claire asked. Jonah wiped his hands on a towel. "Yeah, I think she'd like that." The cemetery sat on a ridge overlooking the town. Rolling hills dotted with wildflowers stretched out in every direction. Claire remembered this place being larger when she was a child, when the idea of death was something distant and confusing. They walked in silence. The crunch of gravel beneath their shoes was the only sound, except for the occasional bird call. Claire's eyes scanned the rows of headstones until Jonah stopped and pointed. "There." The headstone was simple, elegant. Marianne Holloway, beloved wife, mother, sister 1959 to 2016. Claire felt her throat tighten. The date mocked her. She hadn't been there when it happened. Hadn't even answered Jonah's call until it was too late. She knelt and brushed a few fallen leaves from the base of the stone. Her hand trembled. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Jonah stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, looking at nothing in particular. "She waited for you," he said almost inaudibly. "Right until the end." Claire closed her eyes. "I know." A breeze stirred the grass around them. Claire reached into her coat and pulled out a small photograph. A worn, creased image of the three of them, her, Jonah, and their mother on the porch swing, all smiling. She set it gently against the headstone. "She told me once," Jonah said after a while, "that no matter what happened, you'd find your way back." Claire looked up at him. "Did she really say that?" He nodded. She said, "Claire has a compass inside her. She just needs to remember which way is home." Claire's tears came without warning. She turned away quickly, covering her face with her hands. Jonah stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm glad you're here," he said. And for the first time in years, Claire believed he meant it. Later that afternoon, they sat on the front steps of the house, drinking lemonade Jonah had made from a dusty bottle of concentrate he found in the pantry. The heat was mild, the sun low in the sky. "Remember when you tried to build a treehouse in the oak out back?" Claire asked with a smirk. Jonah chuckled. "Yeah, I got halfway up and then realized I was terrified of heights. You made me climb up and hammer in the boards." "I made you. You practically begged to do it." But Claire laughed. and the sound felt strange in her throat. Unused, rusty. Maybe. I just remember Dad yelling at us for using his tools. They fell quiet again, but the silence was warmer now, filled with shared memory rather than tension. "What'd you really leave?" Jonah asked suddenly. Claire stared at her lemonade, her smile fading. "Because I was angry. At Mom, at Dad, at everything. I felt like they didn't see me. Like I wasn't enough, no matter what I did." Jonah frowned. They were proud of you?" They never said it, but they didn't know how?" Claire sighed. "I just wanted someone to tell me I was doing okay, that it was okay to fail sometimes." Jonah looked at her then, and there was something in his eyes that Claire hadn't seen in years. Understanding. Maybe even guilt. "I was proud of you," he said. "Still am. Even when you disappeared for years, I told people my sister lived in New York, working with big firms, traveling. I bragged about you." Claire's chest ached. "I never knew that." "You never asked." That evening, Claire sat in her father's room again, watching him sleep. He looked smaller than she remembered, like the years had slowly hollowed him out. She held his hand gently, afraid of waking him, but afraid, too, of not being there if he slipped away. The old photo albums lay open on the bed beside her. She flipped through them slowly, page by page. There were birthdays and camping trips, school plays and messy Christmas mornings. Evidence of a family that had once felt whole. She found a picture of herself at 17, grinning, arms full of college acceptance letters. Her parents flanking her, their faces proud. She traced the edge of the photo with her finger. She hadn't been forgotten. She had forgotten how to remember. The next day, Claire and Jonah tackled the attic. It was more than a little symbolic, she thought, as she climbed the ladder and pulled open the creaking trapdoor. Dust billowed down like fog. The air was thick with memories. They found boxes of old toys, holiday decorations, and things that hadn't seen the light of day in decades. But they also found treasures. Mom's recipe book, with notes scrawled in the margins, Dad's army medals, Claire's old journals, locked shut with tiny, rusted keys. "This place is a time machine," she muttered, holding up a Polaroid camera. Jonah grinned. "Maybe we should turn the attic into a museum." She laughed. "First we'd have to clean it." But as they sorted, Claire found a cardboard box labeled Claire's college stuff. Inside was a stack of letters, some opened, some not. At the bottom was an envelope addressed in her mother's handwriting. Her heart caught in her throat. She opened it carefully. The paper inside was delicate and slightly yellowed. "Claire, I hope you read this someday. I don't know if we'll ever understand each other perfectly, but I need you to know that I love you. Always have. Always will. I'm proud of you, even if I forget to say it. If you ever feel lost, come home. The door will always be open." Mom Claire pressed the letter to her chest, her eyes filling. In that moment, it felt like something in her cracked open. And maybe, just maybe, something new was beginning to grow. That night, she cooked dinner. An old family recipe, chicken casserole, just like Mom used to make. Jonah helped, fumbling with the spices, laughing when he dropped the salt shaker into the sauce. They set the table, lit candles, even played music on the ancient kitchen radio. Her father joined them, shuffled in slowly with Jonah's help. He didn't eat much, but he smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. "This feels right," Jonah said, raising his glass of water in a quiet toast. Claire nodded. "It does." For the first time in over a decade, the Holloway house was full again. Not just of people, but of warmth, of laughter, of love. And even though the silence between them hadn't vanished, it had softened. They were beginning to speak again. In glances, in shared stories, in the way Jonah passed her the salt without needing to be asked. In the way family always finds a way to speak, even after years of silence. The days passed more gently now. Morning walks with Jonah became a quiet ritual. Sometimes around the neighborhood, sometimes through the wooded trails behind the house. Conversation was no longer strained, though often it was still sparse. They were learning to coexist again, this time with less armor between them. Claire had begun journaling again. She wrote late at night in the same spot on the porch where her mother used to sit and knit. Curled under a throw blanket, notebook on her lap, a cup of tea cooling beside her. Writing helped her untangle the knots in her chest. Guilt, regret, confusion, but also hope. So much more hope than she'd expected. Her father had good days and bad. On the good ones, he recognized her. He asked about her work, though she had left it behind months ago. On the bad ones, he spoke to her like she was a nurse or mistook her for her mother. Those days hurt, but she stayed with him, reading from books he loved, holding his hand until he calmed. One late afternoon, as she was folding laundry in the living room, Jonah came down from the attic with a dusty box in his arms. "You might want to see this," he said, setting it on the coffee table. Claire wiped her hands on a towel and sat across from him. She opened the box slowly, lifting the flaps like she was disarming something delicate. Inside were dozens of envelopes, each one yellowed with age, some tied in bundles with faded ribbons. "What are these?" she asked. "Letters," Jonah said. "From Mom to Dad, and to us." Claire looked at him in surprise. "To us?" He nodded. "She wrote them every year. Birthday letters, just in case something happened. I found a whole stack. One for each birthday up to age 30. Claire's chest tightened. She lifted one bundle labeled, "Claire 18th birthday," in her mother's handwriting. "I had no idea." "Neither did I," Jonah said. "I think she meant for us to find them eventually." But Claire opened the first letter with careful hands. The paper smelled faintly of lavender. "My Claire, 18? I know you probably rolled your eyes at that, but I can't help it. You've always been my little star. You're probably off somewhere. College, maybe, or traveling the world. I hope you're happy. I hope you're being kind to yourself. Life is going to try and convince you that you're not enough. Don't believe it. You are brave. You are brilliant, and you are so loved. Love, Mom." Claire wiped her eyes. She always knew what to say. Jonah reached over and squeezed her hand. "She left these so we wouldn't forget." That night, they decided to tackle another project, the garden. Their mother had kept a small garden near the back fence, full of daisies, lavender, and herbs. After she passed, no one had touched it. The flowers had long been replaced by weeds and wild grass. Claire pulled on a pair of gloves and knelt beside the overgrown patch. Jonah joined her with a rake. "You know Mom used to hum when she planted," she said, digging up a patch of stubborn roots. "Some old tune from the radio. I never knew the name of it." Jonah smirked. "She used to make me sing it with her. I hated it," but Claire laughed. "She made me do the chicken dance in the backyard." "Oh, okay, you win." They worked for hours, pulling weeds, trimming branches, and slowly revealing the bones of their mother's garden. Underneath the neglect, it was still there, resilient, waiting. "She believed in starting over," Claire said as she wiped sweat from her brow. "Yeah," Jonah agreed. "She just didn't always know how to show it." Claire looked around at the garden. "I think we should bring it back. Then we will." The next few weeks unfolded with quiet purpose. Claire planted lavender and rosemary from the local nursery. Jonah fixed the rotted fence boards and repainted the garden bench. Neighbors began stopping by, curious at first, then friendly. Mrs. Whittaker from across the street brought a basket of tomatoes. Old Mr. Clark offered to lend tools from his shed. Claire started to remember things she hadn't in years: the sound of her father's laugh, the way Jonah used to fall asleep during movie nights, her mother's homemade cinnamon bread. One evening, as they sat on the back porch watching fireflies dance above the newly blooming garden, Jonah turned to her. "So what happens after this?" Claire raised an eyebrow. "After what?" "After Dad." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Claire looked out at the yard. "I don't know. Do you go back to the city, back to your life?" She was quiet for a long time. Then, "This is my life? I think I just forgot that." Jonah nodded. "You know, the house is too big for one person." She glanced at him. "Are you trying to talk me into staying?" Maybe. I mean, you could rebuild things here. Start fresh. Stay close. Claire hesitated. The thought terrified her and thrilled her. For so long she'd equated this place with pain. But now, with every repaired step, every unearthed memory, it felt a little more like healing. Maybe, she said, we could turn this into something more. A real garden. Something Mom would be proud of. Jonah's smile was soft. Oh, she'd be proud of you, regardless. It wasn't all easy. There were setbacks. Days when her father didn't recognize her at all and lashed out in confusion. Days when Claire's grief caught her mid-step like a sudden gust of wind. There were arguments. Small things like how to rearrange the kitchen or what color to paint the hallway. But unlike before, these arguments ended in laughter or quiet understanding instead of slammed doors. Claire also began teaching art part-time at the local community center. It started as a favor to Jonah's friend who ran the program. But something about the kids, about watching them turn blank pages into beauty, rekindled something inside her. One afternoon, a girl named Tessa showed Claire a painting she'd done of a family sitting under a tree. The faces were blurred, but the closeness was unmistakable. "Is this your family?" Claire asked. Tessa shrugged. "Not really, just how I wish it looked." Claire smiled softly and crouched beside her. "I used to wish for that too." By summer's end, the house looked different, not brand new, but renewed. The porch was freshly painted. The attic was clean. The garden bloomed again. And for the first time in over a decade, laughter echoed freely through the hallways. One morning, Jonah knocked on Claire's bedroom door. "Dad's asking for you." As she hurried downstairs, her father was sitting upright in bed, clearer than she'd seen him in weeks. "Claire," he said, his voice raspier than before. She sat beside him. "I'm here, Dad." He reached out and touched her cheek. "I missed too much." "So did I," he smiled faintly. "I kept the photo of the three of us at the beach." She nodded, blinking back tears. "I found it in your drawer. I wanted to tell you something." He struggled to sit up straighter, and she helped him. "I wasn't always good with words," he said. "But I loved you. Every day, even when you were gone." Claire leaned her head against his shoulder. "I never stopped being your daughter." They sat in silence, listening to the wind brush the curtains. He squeezed her hand, not hard, but enough. That night he passed peacefully in his sleep. The funeral was quiet, close friends, a few neighbors. Jonah gave a short, heartfelt speech. Claire read one of her mother's letters aloud, the one she'd found tucked into a family photo album. Afterward, they sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind the oak tree. "You okay?" Jonah asked. Claire nodded slowly. "I will be." He nudged her shoulder. "You're not alone, you know." "I know." She looked out at the garden, the place where her family had once scattered, now growing back together again. This wasn't just a return. It was a rediscovery, a rebuilding. And even though grief still lived in the corners, so did love, so did hope. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of memory, forgiveness, and the promise of everything still to come. Autumn came softly to Holloway House. The oaks lining the driveway shed their summer leaves in slow, golden cascades, carpeting the ground in shades of amber, rust, and crimson. The garden, now fully revived, flourished with hardy mums and late, blooming asters. Claire stood by the back fence one crisp morning, hands wrapped around a warm mug, and let the breath of the season settle in her chest. It had been a month since their father passed. The grief still came in waves, unexpected, uneven. But it no longer crashed like it used to. Now it felt more like the tide always there, ebbing in and out, leaving behind traces of memory, some painful, some strangely comforting. Claire had stayed. What started as a temporary visit, an escape, had slowly turned into something more permanent. Her suitcase now sat empty in the closet. Her name had quietly been added to the mailbox. Her days were filled with small joys and steady purpose of morning walks, community center art classes, tending the garden, updating old furniture. The house breathed easier now, lighter with each repair, brighter with every photo and painting she hung on its worn walls. One afternoon, as she was scrubbing paint off her hands, Jonah appeared in the doorway holding a set of blueprints. "What's that?" Claire asked, drying her hands on a towel. He grinned. "Plans. For the barn?" Claire raised an eyebrow. "You want to fix the barn?" "Not just fix. Renovate. Turn it into a greenhouse and maybe a workshop. Grow year-round herbs. Maybe even vegetables." Claire blinked in surprise. "Since when do you want to be a farmer?" Jonah shrugged. "Since it started feeling like home again." She leaned against the counter and studied him. He looked happier lately. Less like someone bearing the weight of the world and more like someone finally building something with it. "Do you need help?" she asked. His smile widened. That was the plan? They spent the next week clearing out the barn. It was filled with relics of the past, rusted tools, broken furniture, boxes of forgotten things. Claire found her father's old fishing rods, tangled in cobwebs, but still intact. Jonah uncovered their mother's gardening apron, folded neatly in a wooden crate. "Feels like we're digging through memories," Claire said, brushing dust off an old swing-set chain. Jonah nodded. "Every item's a story." They laughed over ancient Halloween costumes, bickered over what to keep or toss, and stopped more than once to sit in the middle of the mess and share stories. "That rocking horse," Jonah said, pointing at a broken wooden frame. "You cried for 2 hours when Dad took it away." "I was 5, Claire muttered. "It was a betrayal. You bit him?" She gasped. "I did not. Mum had to bribe you with cookies." Claire groaned. "Okay, maybe I bit him. I don't recall." They both burst out laughing, and for a moment it felt like childhood again. Messy, imperfect, filled with noise and warmth. By the second week, the barn was clean and the foundation plans marked. Jonah had found a local contractor who agreed to help with the structural work. Claire had ordered seed catalogs and started designing layouts for a small greenhouse section. They were building something together, and it felt good. But even as the foundation formed outside, Claire felt tremors of something inside. One chilly evening, as she was locking up the community center, she spotted a familiar figure waiting by the front gate. Eric, her ex-husband. Claire froze. For a moment she thought she'd imagined him. Tall, neatly dressed, hands shoved in his coat pockets, shifting awkwardly on his feet. "Claire," he said, as if her name was a question. She walked toward him slowly. "What are you doing here?" "I called." "A few times." She crossed her arms. "I didn't answer. I noticed." He looked down, then back up. I heard about your dad. I'm sorry." Claire exhaled. "Thanks." But Eric studied her face. "You look different." "Calmer?" "I am." A long silence hung between them. "I came because I wanted to say I'm sorry," he said. "Not for the divorce. I think that was right, but for how I handled things, for how I treated you." Claire stared at him. The old anger flared for a moment, then softened. "I was just as lost as you were." "But you were trying," he said. "And I wasn't. I kept waiting for you to fix everything. And when you didn't, I blamed you." Claire looked at the sidewalk. "I blamed myself too." He nodded slowly. "I just wanted you to know that you didn't fail. You didn't walk away. You walked toward something. I see that now." For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the need to defend or explain herself. She just felt. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for saying that." He took a step back. "I won't keep you. I just wanted to let you know I'm proud of you. And I hope, whatever you're building here, it brings you peace." She watched as he turned and walked away, disappearing down the quiet road. And she realized something. Closure wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was just a quiet exchange under a dim streetlight. A chapter ending without bitterness. Claire walked home under the stars. When she arrived, the porch light was on. Jonah was inside sipping tea and reading an old gardening book. He looked up when she entered. "You okay?" She nodded. Eric came by. Jonah raised an eyebrow. "Seriously?" "It wasn't dramatic," she said, sliding off her coat. He said what he needed to say. I said what I needed to hear. Jonah studied her for a moment. You look like you just dropped a weight. But Claire smiled faintly. I think I did. The next morning, she went into town and signed a lease on a small studio space next to the community center. Her art classes had grown. Parents were asking about private sessions, evening workshops, even gallery nights. She called it the Holloway Studio. Jonah helped her paint the sign. It was simple white letters on wood, with a small lavender sprig beneath. The studio's open, she announced a week later to a small crowd. Local kids ran inside, pointing at their own artwork hanging on the walls. Their parents snapped pictures. Mrs. Whittaker brought cookies. Jonah stood beside her, arms crossed, pride glowing in his eyes. You built something, he whispered. We both did. The seasons changed again. Winter came with soft snowfalls and long nights, but also with candlelight, hot cocoa, and laughter echoing through warm rooms. Claire hosted Christmas dinner. Jonah made the potatoes. They used their mother's tablecloth. And before they ate, they lit a candle for their parents. One tall, white flame flickering in the center of the table. Claire looked around at the people gathered. Neighbors, students, new friends, and realized she hadn't just come home. She'd rooted herself, rewritten her story, rebuilt a family, not the one she lost, but one she had chosen to grow. One night, as snow dusted the ground outside, Claire stood in the garden. Lavender stalks, now dry and brittle, swayed in the moonlight. The barn behind her glowed faintly from the string lights they'd installed, casting soft shadows on the snow. Jonah stepped beside her. It's peaceful here, he said. She nodded. It is. He nudged her with his elbow. So what's next? She smiled. Spring, she said. And after that, who knows? They stood in silence for a while. Not the kind that divided, but the kind that held everything. Everything they had been, everything they had lost, and everything they still hoped to become. Spring arrived like a long exhale. The snow melted in slow surrender, dripping from eaves and feeding the dark soil below. Crocuses broke through first, tiny splashes of purple that Claire greeted each morning like old friends. The garden stirred, sleepy but certain, and the house seemed to breathe easier with each passing day. Claire stood barefoot on the porch one morning, coffee warming her hands, watching a blue jay dart across the yard. The barn was no longer just a barn. It had become their sanctuary. Half greenhouse, half creative haven, it buzzed with life, rows of basil and tomatoes in raised beds. Shelves of paints and sketchbooks, soft music humming from old speakers. She and Jonah had found their rhythm there, blending their lives in a way they never had before. There was still grief that never left. But it had changed shape. It no longer hovered like a shadow behind every memory. Instead, it sat beside her, quiet, present, part of her, but no longer in control. One afternoon, she received a letter. It was from a publisher in New York, forwarded from her old apartment. They'd found her work. An art blog she had almost forgotten she maintained, and wanted to feature a series of her paintings for a regional art exhibit. It wasn't a contract or a promise, just an invitation, but it stirred something deep inside her. She showed it to Jonah that evening. He read it twice, then grinned. You going to do it? I don't know, Claire said honestly. Part of me feels like that chapter's closed. Maybe. But you don't have to stay buried in the soil to grow. You can have roots and wings. She stared at him. He shrugged. I saw that on a mug once. She laughed. Profound. But later that night, as she sat in the studio flipping through her old sketchbooks, the idea kept tugging at her. Not of going back, but of bringing part of herself forward. Of not just returning home, but creating something from all she'd carried. The exhibit was scheduled for late May. Claire began selecting pieces. Old ones from her city years, new ones born from Holloway's piece. Her latest series, Seasons of Return, traced her emotional arc through watercolors and acrylics, a house in shadow, a garden reborn, two siblings standing in a storm with their backs to the wind. Jonah watched her work from across the barn, sanding down an old bench. "You know," he said one day, "you could open a gallery here." And she glanced up, surprised. "In the barn." "Why not? Holloway's more than a last name. It's a story. People love stories." She thought about it. Not just an art space, not just a greenhouse, but a place for stories. Of healing, of remembering, of starting over. "I think I'd like that," she said. Jonah nodded. "Then it's decided." On a warm Friday, the first of their community events took place. They called it the Holloway Gathering. It wasn't fancy, just easels in the garden, tea on mismatched china, and handmade signs welcoming neighbors. Kids painted birdhouses, parents sipped lemonade, and laughter spilled like music. Claire gave a small talk under the birch tree. She shared part of her journey. Not everything, not the hardest parts, but enough. Enough for others to see themselves in her story. And after, people came forward. One woman, her voice trembling, said, "I haven't painted since my husband passed, but seeing this, it makes me want to try again." A teenage boy asked if he could volunteer during the summer. Even Mr. Clark, gruff and usually silent, left behind a note folded in half. "This place reminds me of my wife's garden. Thank you." Claire kept that note in her journal. Around that time, Jonah began talking about adoption. He and his partner, Evan, quiet, kind, and often covered in sawdust, had been together for years but hadn't taken steps to grow their family. Claire watched them build a chicken coop together, side by side, arguing over blueprints and laughing in the sawdust. It was clear they were ready. "You'll be a great dad," she told Jonah one evening as the stars blinked awake. He looked at her with quiet vulnerability. "Think so?" "I know so. And you?" She tilted her head. What's next for you?" Claire took a long breath. "I think I'll keep building. Not just this place, but a life. I want to stay here. Paint, teach, maybe write." Jonah smiled. "So this is home." She looked out at the garden, the house, the barn, and then at her brother, the person who had once been a stranger despite sharing a childhood. "Yes," she said, "it really is." The exhibit in New York came and went. Claire attended in a soft linen dress, her paintings lined in perfect rows on a gallery wall. She stood in front of them, hands folded, watching strangers pause and linger. One woman stood a long time in front of the piece titled The Porch Light, a watercolor of a weathered house glowing from within. "Is this real?" the woman asked Claire. Claire nodded. "Very real." "It feels like forgiveness," the woman said. Claire swallowed the lump in her throat. "That's exactly what it is." Months passed. The Holloway garden grew. The barn hosted monthly workshops. The studio expanded. And slowly, quietly, Claire's world changed. She no longer measured time in deadlines or missed calls. She measured it in seedlings sprouting through dirt, in paint smudges on children's cheeks, in the way neighbors waved when they passed by. One evening, Jonah surprised her with a bench beneath the oak tree. Carved into the backrest were the words, "The door is always open." Claire sat on it every morning with her coffee, watching, listening, living. And then one day, a letter arrived from a girl named Tessa, the same one who had painted the family under the tree during Claire's early teaching days. She had moved away but never stopped writing. Her letter read, "Dear Miss Holloway, I still paint. Every day. I want you to know that your class saved me. That garden, your voice, the way you made space for people to feel without fixing them, it mattered. I hope one day I can do that for someone else. Thank you for seeing me. Love, Tessa." Claire cried when she read it, not out of sadness, but because she had once needed someone to say those same words to her. And now she had become that someone for others. The silence that had once existed between her and Jonah was no longer silence. It was a shared language, of glances, of knowing, of the way people grow apart and then, miraculously, grow back together. Sometimes at dinner, they would talk about their parents, not in hushed tones, but with laughter, with love. Claire would say, "Remember when Mom caught you stealing her pie crust?" And Jonah would groan, "I was 8. Let it go." And Claire would smile. She never did. She wrote about it in one of her letters. Those letters had been moved to a special box kept in the center of the house. Whenever either of them had a bad day, they'd pull one out and read. They had learned that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about remembering better. Years later, the Holloway garden became a small nonprofit. The house was restored entirely. Children grew up painting under the oak tree. Teenagers found comfort in quiet studio corners. Lonely elders found company in dirt and sun and memory. And Claire, once broken, once angry, stood whole, not perfect, but present, alive. She had found her voice again, and in the soft, steady language of love and effort, she helped others find theirs. On the 10th anniversary of her return home, Claire hosted a celebration under the stars. Paper lanterns swayed from tree branches. Music hummed gently from old speakers. Jonah, now a father of 2, raised a glass in her honor. "To Claire," he said, voice thick with emotion, "for coming home, for staying, for turning silence into song." Applause rose around her. Friends, students, neighbors, family. And Claire stood beneath the oak tree, hand on her heart, eyes shining. "I used to think I had nothing left," she said, "that I'd burned every bridge. But sometimes the best stories start not with running, but with returning." She looked at Jonah, then at the faces gathered before her. "You helped me find my voice. I hope I helped you find yours too." And as the lanterns lifted slowly into the night, carried by the gentlest wind, Claire closed her eyes and listened. To the laughter, to the music, to the quiet peace of a life fully lived. And she knew the silence between them had become something beautiful. The Holloway house had learned to breathe. The cracks had been sealed, the floorboards mended, but its true healing was something deeper. An invisible thread woven through every room, every whisper of wind that passed through the curtains, every photo now framed and proudly displayed on the walls. It was a home again. Not a museum of grief, but a living thing filled with laughter, footsteps, and love. Claire stood in the attic one rainy morning, the soft patter of droplets echoing on the roof. She was sorting through the last untouched corner, her father's storage boxes. The air was thick with dust and memory. She pulled one box closer, labeled only with his initials, H. Inside were things she hadn't expected, letters her father had written but never sent. Receipts, notes, small trinkets. A dried flower from her mother's wedding bouquet. Her old report cards, a napkin sketch of a porch renovation he'd apparently dreamed of. One letter was addressed to her. She sat cross-legged, heart pounding, and unfolded the aged paper. "My Claire, if you're reading this, it means I've gone where your mother went ahead of me. I don't know what form your life has taken, but I hope you're home, or at least on your way back. I know I wasn't good at saying what I felt. I was raised to believe silence was strength, that emotion was weakness, but you taught me otherwise. Even in your absence, you were always teaching me. I watched you grow into someone fierce and bright. I was proud. I never said it enough. Maybe never once, but I was. If you've come home, thank you. If you haven't yet, you will. You're my daughter. You always find your way back to what matters. Forgive me if I ever made you feel unloved. You were never the problem. I just didn't know how to reach you. I love you, Claire. Now and always." "Dad." Claire's tears fell freely, not from sadness, but from the release of years she hadn't even realized she was still holding. She sat for a long time in that attic, the storm outside washing everything clean. Then, without fanfare, she folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket. Some things deserve to stay close to the heart. By summer, the Holloway garden was more alive than ever. Local schools brought students to visit, to paint, to plant. Retired neighbors volunteered to help maintain the greenhouse. And every weekend, the barn buzzed with art classes, poetry readings, storytelling circles, and even small concerts. Jonah's children, Emmy and Leo, ran barefoot through the grass, covered in dirt and joy. Claire adored them, like a second chance at childhood woven into her adulthood. They called her Auntie C, and their laughter became the music of the garden. And then came an unexpected visitor. Claire was cleaning paintbrushes when a girl stepped nervously into the barn. She was maybe 16, all angles and shyness, clutching a wrinkled notebook. "Hi," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Riley. My school counselor told me about this place." Claire smiled and set the brush down. "Welcome, Riley. You like art?" "I don't know," she said. "I think I like stories. I don't really fit anywhere else." Claire nodded. "Neither did I, until I made a place of my own." Riley looked around at the shelves and canvases, the easels and books. "Do I have to be good?" "No," Claire said, without hesitation. You just have to be honest." Riley smiled for the first time, just a flicker. That night, Claire found a new canvas and painted a girl standing at the edge of a field, notebook in hand, watching the horizon like it might open just for her. Later that month, Claire finally submitted her first book proposal. It was part memoir, part reflection, titled The Silence Between Yous. The chapters followed no strict chronology. They flowed like memory, like seasons, like growth. It was a tapestry of her family's story, of loss and return, of Jonah and the garden, of her parents' letters and the long road home. Her publisher accepted it with enthusiasm. "We want to keep the structure exactly as it is," the editor said. "It's quiet and powerful. People need stories like this." Claire wasn't chasing bestseller lists. She was building legacy, and more importantly, she was giving voice to those who, like her younger self, didn't yet know how to speak. That fall, they held a dedication ceremony for the garden. A simple wooden plaque was installed near the old bench under the oak tree. It read, "The Holloway Garden for those who lost their way and found it again. For those who speak through silence. For those still growing." Dozens came. Former students, neighbors, artists, children. Claire wore a light shawl and carried a small bouquet of lavender, her mother's favorite. Jonah gave a speech, hand on her shoulder. "My sister didn't just come back," he said. She came home, yes. But more than that, she brought others with her. She turned this house, this garden, this barn into a beacon. And it taught me that home isn't just where you live. It's where you're loved, challenged, forgiven, and seen. But Claire blinked away tears and stepped forward. "I used to believe silence meant something was broken," she said. "But sometimes silence is just waiting to be filled. With truth, with healing, with new beginnings. You helped me understand that." They released paper lanterns into the twilight, watching as they rose like prayers. One caught in the wind and drifted toward the horizon, dancing like a soul set free. Years passed. Claire's book became a quiet classic. Schools taught it, book clubs discussed it. Lost daughters, estranged brothers, grieving parents wept over it, and some, inspired by it, made their own way home. Claire never left the Holloway house again. She aged there gracefully, surrounded by gardens and paint and poetry. Jonah and even lived nearby. The children grew. Tessa, now a grown woman, returned one day to teach a class of her own in the same barn where she once found her courage. And Claire, with hair silvered by time, watched from the porch, her hand resting on the arm of the old bench. On her final birthday, quiet, peaceful, under a blooming tree, Claire gathered her dearest ones. She read aloud from the very last letter her mother had written. "Life will never be just one thing. It will be pain and joy, lostness and return, silence and song. But always remember, you are not alone, not ever. We are made to return. We are made to forgive. We are made to love. And home is never far. It's in your bones, in your breath, in the people who wait with the porch light on. Come back when you're ready. The door never closes. Love, always, Mom." Claire looked around, at Jonah, at the grandchildren, at students and strangers who had become family, and she smiled. Not because everything had been perfect, but because everything had been real. Epilogue. Claire Holloway passed peacefully one spring morning, curled in the chair by her studio window, paintbrush still in her hand. Her obituary was simple: Claire Holloway, at 1994-2071. Artist, author, teacher, and founder of the Holloway Garden, passed away surrounded by family. She was known for turning silence into strength and for teaching generations that the path home is never closed. On the day of her memorial, People came from all over. They brought flowers, books, poems, sketches, and stories. Riley, now an author herself, spoke with tears in her voice. Jonah stood beside her, gray and strong, reading one last letter Claire had written. If you're reading this, it means I've gone ahead. I'm with Mom and Dad now, maybe watching from somewhere quiet. But please remember this. Whatever silence is left between us, fill it. With laughter, with kindness, with forgiveness, and never stop growing. Claire, the oak tree stood tall above the garden. The bench remained sturdy and worn, and the door of Holloway house, like the hearts within it, never truly closed. The silence between us a story of home, healing, and love. The end. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe and like the video.